Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lori Hilton. I'm going to be facilitating this afternoon's conversation. Thank you again for joining us. We've got two great speakers lined up for you, and we are looking forward to a really fruitful discussion. So as we're getting started, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce Joining Hands to anyone who might be joining us for the first time and is unfamiliar with the Joining Hands initiative. Joining Hands is a program of the Presbyterian Hunger Program. It works on mobilizing campaigns around issues that tackle the systemic causes of poverty and hunger, both in the United States and abroad. We've got three major campaign focus areas: food, land, and water, resource extraction, climate change, and trade justice. So we've got a whole series of webinars that we've been working on all year long, and this is the latest in our Food, Land, and Water series. And you'll be hearing from one of our partners in India. You'll be hearing from Spurgeon Raj. Here's just a quick overview of the campaigns that we have going on, and specifically I said we'd be hearing from our partner in India as they're working on a GMO seed sharing campaign going there right now. Okay, so moving very quickly, one of the things that has always sort of stuck with me whenever we have this conversation around GMO seeds or seeds in general is, what does that really mean? So again, background for all of you who may be having this conversation for the first time: organic seeds contain no genetically engineered traits. Hybrid seeds are seeds that are cross-pollinated, produced by cross-pollination. So one plant variety crossed with another plant variety has been happening for millions of years in the wild, and now happens in greenhouses around the world. These are the kinds of seeds that we're more familiar with. Genetic seed varieties, GMO seeds, are created in labs and often involve the insertion of traits from differing species into the seed. So that's the main issue involved in GMO seeds, or at least one of the main issues that defines a seed as being GMO. So I want you guys to have that background knowledge before we get started. Okay, and then we'll be getting into the DARK Act and what we know so far about the DARK Act. We'll be hearing a great deal about that from our presenter, Melinda Sulflo. So, with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Our first presenter will be Melinda Sulflo. She is the campaign coordinator for the Organic Consumers Association. She'll be speaking about the impacts of the DARK Act and how we can work towards more transparency in the food system. Our second speaker will be Spurgeon Raj. He's the coordinator for Tethana. It's the Joining Hands program in India, and he will speak about the unregulated influx of GMO seeds into India and the efforts to better inform consumers and farmers to ensure the protection of traditional seeds and foods. So with that, I would like to turn things over to our first speaker, Melinda Sulflo, and we're looking forward to hearing what she's got to say. Melinda?
Hi, thank you so much for that great introduction, Lori, and for going over the difference between heirloom, hybrid, and GMO seeds. I think it's really important that folks understand that when we have these discussions. So I'm just going to jump in. So the DARK Act, as many of you know, was passed earlier this summer. Congress passed it, and President Obama signed it into law. It's DARK. The acronym stands for Deny Americans the Right to Know, and basically that name for this legislation came about because it will deny consumers the right to know if the food they're purchasing has been genetically modified. A quick timeline: the House of Representatives passed their version of this legislation last year. It was bill number HR 1599, and it was an even stronger bill that not only preempted the one state law that was about to go into effect, Vermont's GMO labeling law, but it also would have created a voluntary federal scheme. So we didn't want that at all. And we knew that the Senate probably wouldn't accept that bill either. Unfortunately, they drafted their own legislation in March of this year, and we were able to defeat that pretty closely. The vote came down 48 to 49, and the Senate knew they would need 60 votes to get it through without a problem in the Senate. And so they went back to the drawing table, basically, to come up with a bill to preempt Vermont's law. That's pretty much the motivation for all of this, is the big food companies have been arguing from the start that we can't have a patchwork of state laws, that the federal government needs to act and enact some kind of labeling scheme. And of course, those big food companies want to keep you in the dark, and so best case scenario for them would have been a voluntary scheme. They couldn't get that, so they worked as hard as they could to come up with what we've got today, which supporters are calling a federal GMO labeling scheme, and which we're basically calling a labeling sham. So that bill has been signed into law. As the slide that Lori showed, it gives the USDA 2 years to write the rules to guide that legislation. So basically, there will be no kinds of labels on foods that have been genetically modified for at least another 2 years. Most importantly, this version preempts Vermont's GMO labeling law, which had already taken effect. That bill went into effect July 1st. So foods were actually labeled in the U.S. for a while, for a few weeks at the very least, and the DARK Act has now essentially unlabeled these foods for American consumers. So impacts of the DARK Act. So it overturned Vermont's GMO labeling law, which was able to take effect for a few weeks on July 1st before this bill was passed by the Senate. It also overturned GMO labeling laws in Connecticut and Maine. And those two states had passed laws similar to Vermont's, but they had clauses in them where they wouldn't take effect until more states passed similar legislation. And that was basically to protect them from legal action. Many of you might know that when Vermont passed their GMO labeling law, they were sued. And actually, so far, the courts upheld their law. So it's unfortunate, again, that Congress decided to preempt it. There were two other GMO seed labeling laws that were in effect in Virginia and Vermont, and so this DARK Act legislation also preempts those bills or overturns them. And it also nullifies a bill in Alaska to label genetically engineered fish, and they were trying to do that to protect their wild salmon fisheries from genetically engineered salmon. So not only did it preempt Vermont's GMO labeling law, but it preempted these other state laws as well. A question that we often get, does the DARK Act preempt some of the county-level GMO cultivation bans? And luckily, it does not. So I believe in Oregon and California, there's a number of counties where they have been able to pass bans on the cultivation of genetically engineered crops, and the DARK Act will not preempt those bills. So further impacts, 2 years for it to be implemented. There's no enforcement mechanisms, so we're calling it a voluntary labeling scheme, even though supporters of the bill called it a mandatory bill. And another reason that we call it voluntary is it's going to rely not on words on the actual package, but there's a whole scheme that was developed with the big food companies and the Grocery Manufacturers Association. So instead of simple words such as made with genetic engineering or produced with genetic engineering on the actual food package label, the bill allows companies to choose from using a symbol, an 800 number, or a QR code. And we know from the Grocery Manufacturers Association they'd already developed this QR code, what they call smart label system, where the consumer has to have a smartphone, has to have access to the internet, scans the product, is then taken to the company's website where the company will be required to reveal whether or not that product contains genetically modified ingredients. And the reason that the Grocery Manufacturers Association and these big food companies went along with this scheme is, scanning that QR code essentially takes the consumer to a website controlled by that company. So not only will they perhaps let you know if the product's been genetically modified, but no doubt they will attempt to provide all sorts of other information to the consumer to market their product and so forth. So essentially it's voluntary because there's no enforcement. It's discriminatory. There's a number of American consumers, of course, that don't have a smartphone, may not have access to internet in a rural area, so huge sections of the population are effectively going to be left in the dark with this QR code labeling scheme. And then one of the biggest impacts of the DARK Act and why we think it is such a sham is the definition of bioengineered in the legislation essentially means that a number of genetically modified products will be exempt due to the definition of genetic engineering in the bill. I believe it says that the product must contain genetic material that's been modified by in vitro recombinant DNA techniques, and processed foods might not contain the exact detectable genetic material that definition requires. Furthermore, that definition does not include newer genetic modification techniques like gene editing, when DNA might simply be deleted or edited in the product. And the FDA itself, actually, Obama's FDA, came out and said that it's quite likely that many of the current genetically modified foods won't be labeled because of the way the bill was written. And I think, so that's some of the logistics specifically about the legislation. 2 years, no enforcement, QR codes. Consumers really are still in the dark, and we will be in the dark in 2 years when the bill supposedly will take effect. I think one of the greater impacts this legislation had for consumers as the U.S. is kind of the way the bill was developed. It was a backroom deal from the start. There weren't public hearings. There was no expert testimony. You had a few senators who were dealing with, industrial food and biotech companies and trade associations like the Grocery Manufacturers Association. And one of the biggest blows to our, organic and sustainable food and farming movement is that it's quite likely this bill was passed. They gained the few senators that they needed through another backroom deal with the Organic Trade Association. So around about the time that Senator Roberts and Stabenow said they were working on a compromise, at the 11th hour there was a piece added to the DARK Act that would allow organic foods to be labeled non-GMO without them having to be tested. Currently, you have the non-GMO project. It tests foods, and we all know that it's possible that something that has the USDA organic label could be contaminated accidentally, cross-pollination with a genetically modified crop, etc. So the organic members, or I should say perhaps even leaders, I wouldn't say the rank and file membership of the Organic Trade Association, but some of their significant leaders and even a couple of our coalition partners, or so-called coalition partners in the labeling movement, decided that a compromise would be acceptable, that what we now have as a DARK Act was an acceptable compromise, and especially leaders in the organic movement, they encouraged senators to go along with the bill because of this, what I would call a very minor win for organic foods, that they can be labeled non-GMO without having to be tested. So the biggest impact is we really understood that money trumps everything, and even the organic movement through the Organic Trade Association and some of the larger food companies that own organic brands, but the majority of their products are not organic, really have a lot of influence, and that's the cards are all out on the table, luckily. So at least we know where everybody stands. And let's see, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but we do want to talk a little bit about where do we go from here. So we've got this terrible bill. It doesn't have to go into effect for 2 years. There's no mechanism to enforce it. It's got these crazy QR code labeling schemes. So what do we do? Basically, after taking a close look at the legislation, Organic Consumers Association and many of our allies, Senator others, really have just decided that there's no room to fix this, and there's really no room to work with the USDA as they write these rules. Our only options at this point are to block implementation of the bill and to work to get the Senate to get Congress to repeal this legislation. And we do have a lot of advocates in Congress for us on that front. Senators like Senator Blumenthal in Connecticut, it's rumored that he could introduce legislation to repeal the DARK Act. Senators like Bernie Sanders have been adamantly against this bill from the beginning. So we'll work with those allies that we do have as best we can. And another option, another maybe best case scenario would be if the state of Vermont could be convinced to sue. Because this bill preempts their legislation, they had an effective GMO labeling bill that went into effect on July 1st, and this federal bill after the fact tried to preempt it. They do have a case, and that case basically is that the federal government can't preempt something with nothing. So the case could be made that the federal government can't legally subvert the will of the people with a federal law that's so full of loopholes and exemptions that it's essentially meaningless. And so that is a definite legal argument that could be made, and it would be most effective if the state of Vermont were to do that. And I don't think we've seen indication yet that they plan on doing that, but that is one possibility. I'll just take a few more minutes. Basically, where do we go from here? We all want more transparency in our food system. Consumers, farmers, everybody deserves to know what they are eating. And so basically, from the perspective of the Organic Consumers Association, we've always advocated for the grassroots. We've advocated for consumers looking for safe, organic, sustainably produced food. And so we're really calling for a turn back to that grassroots-powered type of revolution. We've learned working with Congress that money really does trump all, and some of you may have caught, we did a little political action in the Senate. Our political director with a couple of other activists tossed $2,001 bills over the Senate balcony during the vote to indicate our belief, that these senators have been bought by the biotech and the big food industry. So taking a step back from lobbying Congress, not that we shouldn't continue to do that, but what can we do with our grassroots power? First of all, we've come a long way. Throughout this entire GMO labeling movement, we've educated a critical mass of consumers in the U.S. We've doubled the demand for organic and grass-fed products. We even forced companies to temporarily label their foods with as genetically engineered ahead of Vermont's law taking effect and ahead of the DARK Act getting passed. And we've also educated and alerted consumers to the fact that we can't necessarily trust the media and Congress and federal agencies to look out for our best interests. So it really is time to turn back to the grassroots. GMO labels were just one tool, and GMOs are just one piece of a toxic chemical industrial food system. And so we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at how we can rebuild a food system that works for the people, that works for farmers, that works for clean air, clean water, and improving biodiversity in our soil. So the Organic Consumers Association will be unleashing campaigns over the upcoming weeks to boycott GMOs. Definitely boycott and shame any company that attempts to put these QR codes on their products as a so-called label. We need to support the good companies out there that are producing organic and grass-fed food. Essentially, we call that a boycott. And boycott factory farms. They really are the bulk of genetically modified crops in this country are fed to livestock on factory farms. So we need to do our best to expose that toxic industry and to take it down if we really want to make significant change. And we definitely believe that we can. And lastly, we just need to always keep our eye on Congress, do our best to stop supporting these corrupt politicians that are so willing to sell out the majority of consumers that just want to know what's in their food. Unfortunately, it's the majority probably of Congress, but we can do what we can to get rid of these elite legislators and put some fresh faces in that will actually advocate for the people. A couple of tools that are coming up. First of all, there's the International Monsanto Tribunal taking place at The Hague, October 15th through and 16th. So in just a month and a half or so, we're partnering with March Against Monsanto to do some actions throughout the country. And this tribunal will also be live streamed, and there will also be a People's Assembly taking place at The Hague. And it's really just an attempt to put attention on Monsanto and their crimes against humanity and the environment, and to hold them accountable. They're just one face of our big food system, but this is an opportunity for the people to stand up, hold Monsanto accountable, bring those crimes to light, and then provide sort of a legal framework for individual nations to perhaps take legal action on their own. So we've been involved in that. And then we've also partnered with a new app. So it's a little bit ironic that, you know, the DARK Act is putting forth this QR code scheme. Turns out QR codes are one of the ways that we as consumers can actually take action. So if you do happen to have a smartphone, this is one tool that you can use. And I'll just quickly show it. I'm probably running a little bit short on time here. But if we go to the Boycott app. So this is a free app, and the creators of this app got in touch with us immediately because they were concerned about GMOs and they wanted OCA to be a part of it. Basically, you go to boycott.com, or on your smartphone, you can go to your app store or your Google store and download the app. And then the Organic Consumers Association has created this campaign, pro-GMO or pro-right to know. And as you can see, we've already got over 500,000 members, which is amazing. It's been in effect for a couple of years. But basically, once you've downloaded this app, you take your phone to the store and you can scan products, and we will let you know if these are products that you should buy, or if they're, as in boycott, or if these are products that you should be boycotting. And we based that on, you know, did these companies lobby for or against GMO labeling? So are they working for transparency in our food system or against it? And unfortunately, you know, there are a couple of organic brands that we have to list on the boycott side of things because their parent companies are lobbying heavily against transparency. So with this app, I just kind of wanted to show you a picture in case it's something you're interested in. You download the app, and then you have to join our campaign, and it should walk you through it. And then you can see we have a list of companies to avoid and companies to support. There were a number of good companies out there that have helped us out in this movement to get GMO labels on our food. All right, so that's about all that I've got to share with you today. I hope I didn't take too much time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And let's see, I don't know how to unshare my screen, but we could do that at this point as well.
Melinda, I have a quick question for you. In addition to the boycott app and the ideas that you've outlined, I've heard a couple of people suggest letter writing campaigns directed towards the companies. Towards companies that have been opposing, promoting this legislation. Is that something that you, the Organic Consumers Association, is working on as well? Are there resources for something like that?
Yeah, definitely. That's always a great strategy. Letter writing, and then also, you know, hitting them on social media if you can, just posting on their pages. The beautiful thing about this app is that it's not just an app. It is also just a website, so folks can go to boycott.com and see all of the companies. you know, that we're asking folks to avoid. And I'll try to find a food one here for you quick. We've got a lot on here that are just biotech companies. But just on the website itself, so just with your computer, you don't need a smartphone, you can go to the boycott.com site, take a look at our campaign, and find contact information for these companies. Definitely, we always advocate use your consumer power, use your dollars in the store, but then also make sure you're telling these companies when you're boycotting them and why. And then thanking companies that you are happy to support. So that's definitely another option. I'm sure that over the next months, couple of years, we'll be doing consumer campaigns. So folks that are subscribed to the Organic Consumers Association, if you get our email newsletter, we often set up a lot of consumer-based action alerts, and we will be doing more of that in the coming months. So opportunities for just, with a click to send our form letter or edit our form letter off to the company as well. But yeah, we'll need everybody's help to let these companies know that we no longer want to buy their food. Good question.
I'm gonna unmute Andrew. He had a comment to make. Andrew? Or he's on the phone, so maybe he can't talk. Anyway, Andrew said, great presentation.
Sorry about that.
There you are.
Hi, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was a great presentation. Really wanted to thank Melinda for taking the time to join us today. And I just had a quick a story about the boycott. I was at a booth at a festival here in Louisville, and this family came up to us and was talking about how they were now boycotting Wendy's because they saw a button I had on, and they had heard about it on boycott, and they were raving about it. And it's a great little tool for folks to learn about campaigns and get active on them. So thanks, Melinda, and yeah, that was it.
Thanks, Andrew.
We can hold any other questions or comments from Melinda till the end of the webinar. So now we're going to go to Spurgeon.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Spurgeon from India. I'm representing Chetana Network that mainly works with the small and marginal farmers in the southern part of India. We work with about a dozen partners in the southern part of India in 3 states. That's Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. So thank you, Lori and Melinda, for your introduction and presentation. I'm going to jump into the presentation. So that's the front page of my presentation, which speaks for itself. So going to the introduction. India's government once opposed GMO crops, but it is now opening its doors to companies like Monsanto, Syngenta, and other international agricultural giants. There is widespread suffering and even suicide among farmers that feel pressured into buying their products. Basically, in India, this debate has engaged the attention not only of the government but also of the farming communities, especially the small and marginal farming communities, health-conscious middle class, and the larger civil society groups. Ironically, it is claimed that the biotechnology, particularly the GE food, offers dramatic promise for meeting some of the 21st century's greatest challenges, like all new technologies. However, it also poses certain apprehensions and risks, both known and unknown. The origins of GE in India is like this. The proponents argue that the GM technologies have been around for about 15 years or so, and they have been in use across the world, including countries like Brazil and China. Interestingly, during a visit to India in March 2005, Norman Borlaug, regarded as the father of the Green Revolution, supported producing genetically modified food and eradicate hunger from the world. He said, it is better to die eating GM food instead of dying of hunger. And there are quite a few interesting arguments here, both sides of the coin. First, I would like to read out those who are for the GM crops in India. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, saw biotechnology as key to food security and warned against succumbing to unscientific prejudices. And following his statement, President of India, Mr. President Pranab Mukherjee, stated that the concerns over their perceived risks should be addressed by the following internationally accepted procedures for assessing safety parameters. The ICAR, which is the premier or the pioneer body for agriculture, that is Indian Center for Agricultural Research, which is involved in developing useful products and technologies in this field, must contribute to the public discourse and provide clarity on the sensitive issue, is stated. And the Indian Intelligence Agency names anti-GM groups such as Greenpeace, for example, in India, and Gene Campaign as one of the many anti-national foreign-funded NGOs hampering India's economic progress. Arguments in favor of GM crops now. This is the second of the four group. Again, agriculture scientists from the research institutions, including IARI, which was responsible primarily for leading the Green Revolution campaign in India in the 70s, and also ICAR and various universities demanding field trials for GM crops, arguing that confined field trials are essential for the evaluation of productivity, performance, as well as food and environmental safety assessment. And also a group of prominent scientists had met under father of Green Revolution, Mr. M.S. Swaminathan, at National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and issued a 15-point resolution in favor of GM crops. We have as a civil society and Greenpeace as a civil society have some concerns against GM crops in view of health, human health risks and environmental safety. The Greenpeace has been arguing that the GM crops don't yield better results, but push the farmers, when I say farmers, it's small and marginal farmers, into debt, which they cannot come out of it because often they get into a sort of vicious cycle of indebtedness. And they lose their sovereign right over seeds as they are forced to buy GM foods and technologies from multinational companies. Thereby, that sustainable chain is broken, thereby increasing incidence of suicide by farmers cultivating BT cotton is cited as an example of the perils of GM crops in a country such as India. I could see a poster next to the text how GMO has been fighting for the cause in India. And besides the suspect merits of GM crops, what the opponents also say is that once they are released into the environment, it's irreversible. So that's another concern over there. And potential impact on human health, including allergens, transfer of antibiotic resistance markers, and outcrossing. The current safety assessments are inadequate to catch most of the harmful effects from the GM crops. Therefore, GM technology is unpredictable and imprecise. That too when released in an open environment situation. And moreover, the regulatory regime in India with regard to the GM crops has never been assessed thoroughly with regard to GM risk assessment in the Indian context or conditions. And a potential impact on environment as well, including transfer of transgenes through cross-pollination, unknown effects on other organisms like soil microbes, and loss of flora, fauna, and biodiversity. Several studies in BT crops show that there are many potential health hazards in BT crops, like allergies have been reported, itching on the skin, eruptions on the body, swollen faces, etc., have been reported, correlated with levels of exposure to BT cotton. Many groups are also studying the decline in fertility and milk yield of cattle due to GM cottonseed cattle feed. BT cotton has caused powerful immune responses and normal cell growth in mice, for example. And proteins in BT crops have amino acid sequence similar to known allergens and or hence potential allergens. You can see on the pictures presented over there where one of the fields is affected with, you can see some of the crops are at complete failure, and in another picture where the animal after consumption has bloated and died. And here are a few other pictures where you can see a goat with some skin allergies, and a man showing his calf muscle under the, above the ankle, having some problems with his skin rashes. And you can see some of the goats, which were just born on, or probably they are stillbirth. In continuation, we have apprehension that's been expressed, and that the target pest would grow resistance to BT cotton or toxin with time. So not enough studies on soil ecology have been done to understand the impact of BT toxin. Farmers from various parts of the country have reported a decline in their soil productivity after growing BT cotton. The farmers have also questioned the need for a GM brinjal when there is surplus production, leading to a glut at times. And this is a fairly new issue in comparison to the cotton. And the first was cotton, the second was BT brinjal, and the third was BT mustard. Coming to that as well, BT mustard. With the promotion of GM agriculture in general, and with BT brinjal in particular, the rights of non-GM farmers to stay GM-free get badly affected. The pricing policy has also been questioned. Cost recovery would be much higher for BT brinjal seeds due to the research and marketing involved. Moreover, patient infringements is a big concern of agribusiness, and litigation on the part of the company with regard to pricing and use of GM seeds is not a new thing. You can see the brinjal, GM brinjal on your left, how the shape and the kind of outward appearance. And speaking about the GEAC, the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, that is the committee which is statutory in nature, which functions under the Ministry of Environment and Forests for approval of activities involving large-scale use of hazardous living microorganisms and recombinants in research and industrial production from the environmental angle, as per the provisions of the rules laid in 1989. And on to your right, you could see the places in India where various crop trials are being taken or proposed. So mainly in South India, it is Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Karnataka for cotton and Andhra Pradesh for chickpea and cotton, and Maharashtra for brinjal, rice, maize, and cotton. In Gujarat, you can see cotton and maize. Rajasthan, cotton. Delhi, mustard. Haryana, maize and cotton. And Punjab, mustard, maize. Punjab is known for wheat production. Going to BT cotton issue, which is quick to rise but early to fall. If you look at the statistics from 12 to 13 and between 12 to 13 and 15 to 16, you can see a gradual rise and a dramatic fall in the year 14 and 15 in both the states, Punjab and Haryana. And from then on, it's been declining. So for the time being, the only genetically modified crop that is under cultivation in India is BT cotton, which is grown over 10.8 million hectares. BT cotton was first used in India in 2002. BT cotton cultivation has resulted in adverse economics for farmers, highly priced seeds, changed pest ecology in cotton fields, increased incidence of diseases, requiring more and more pesticides year by year, and unpredictable crop performance and more resources being used by farmers as part of their risk insurance mechanisms. So stress tolerance of BT cotton, such as surviving adverse weather conditions, is also said to be very low. And that's the photograph where the farmers in Karnataka are protesting by, putting all the failed crops to fire as a way to show their protest. And in another incident where farmers are protesting in front of a seed company amid BT cotton crop failure, and they have removed the board as well, and the police had to involve to stop the protests. And coming to the BT brinjal issue, and the GEAC in 2007 recommended that commercial release of the brinjal, country's first genetically modified food for commercial use, which was developed by Mahiko, that is Maharashtra Hybrid Seeds Company, in collaboration with the Dharwad University of Agricultural Sciences, which is one of the leading universities in the southern part of India, and the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, which is also another leading universities in India. But the release was banned in 2010 amidst protests and campaigns by the anti-GM groups. This was basically during the time of UPA government, that is the Union Progressive Alliance government, where it was I mean, accepting people's outcries, and it had a heart to lend ears to the people's concerns. So it was easier then to ban the BT brinjal going forward for field trials and so forth. And here is a brief timeline of the GE crops in India. In 2002, BT cotton was introduced in India, the only crop that allowed to be grown commercially. And in 2006, activists filed a public interest litigation against GM crops in the Supreme Court of India. And then in 2010, the Centre stops commercial production of BT brinjal. No objection certificates from the states made mandatory to conduct field trials. And in 2012, Parliamentary Committee seeks moratorium on field trials of all GM food crops. And in July 13, a Supreme Court appointed panel suggests moratorium of GM field trials. Environment Minister Jayanthi Natarajan puts trials on hold. And December 13, Mr. Moily takes charge of Environment Ministry, and then in February 14, Moily reverses Natarajan's stand, clears the way for field trials of GM crops. This is a dramatic shift after the Congress government was defeated. The BJP government came into power, and BJP's pro BT and GM technology in India. So they have overturned the decision there. And in 2016, there is another GM food crop which is being pushed for commercial cultivation approval, and an application for the release of 3 GMOs, this time of mustard, that ubiquitous crop that all of us are familiar with, is in an advanced stage of processing by the Indian regulators. That is quite alarming, and there's a lot of protests and demonstrations going on across the country. And that's Ms. Vandana Shiva, one of the environmentalists, and she's a doctoral fellow, and widely seen in Indian media and in the movement of resisting GMOs and so on. So she states, we must end Monsanto's colonization, its enslavement of farmers for whom the only escape from the Monsanto treadmill is suicide. This statement came in view of a number of farmers committing suicide over the BT crop failure issue, especially with cotton. So that's about it, really. Yeah. Any questions? Welcome.
Well, Spurgeon, thank you so much for that presentation. It was really very compelling.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome. Yeah.
I think when I hear about the work that's going on and the struggle, and this isn't the first time that I've heard about it, but each time I know that for myself I'm wondering what additionally I could do, or locally we can do to support the work that you're doing in India. What additional support can we offer? How can we further your work?
I think probably probably you could help by updating us what sort of actions or new tactics these companies are implementing in the United States, and whether we can cross-verify these people taking similar strategies in India as well, and to see if the kind of strategies or tactics they're taking in USA and India are similar. Probably we can take sort of synergies from you guys, and take the strengths and take the ideas and exchange of dialogue. Probably take those ideas with us and probably implement the similar strategies here to protest and and take the issue forward. Yeah.
Great. I mean, what you're saying, I think, sort of ties in a bit with something that Melinda mentioned about the International Tribunal going on in October. I believe that's directed primarily towards Monsanto, but again, this is an action that's happening internationally that we can be supportive of. Melinda, can you give us some clarification on that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something first, Virgin?
Sorry, can you put your mic a little bit closer to you?
Can everybody hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, it is the International Monsanto Tribunal, so it is specific to Monsanto, bringing them to a citizens tribunal to try them for the various crimes they've committed. And I'm pretty sure that Vandana Shiva is involved, so it's quite possible that what has taken place and is taking place in India will be a topic at that tribunal. So, did that answer your question? Ways to get involved: individuals can sign on to the tribunal at their website. I think it's monsanto-tribunal.org. Organizations can also sign on to support the tribunal, and individuals can just do the best to get the word out about it. It'll be more effective the more we're able to promote it. Were there other questions about the tribunal or anything else?
Well, yeah, that's a good idea. I've never known that there is a tribunal online, and Miss Vandana Shiva is also part of that. Yeah, because this is fairly new to me, so I'm kind of getting my head around to know about the campaigning, and especially the international campaigning and the national campaigning as well. So yeah, that could be one tool that we can take away, and also let the partners know to take pro stance on letting their protest know, and keep those people in an organization level to engage with that, and also individually, as you suggested. That could be one useful tool for us. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Valerie, can you get a little closer?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
That's better.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make a quick comment after listening to Melinda and Spurgeon.
Yes.
I was in just the question you asked Laurie about what can we do.
Yeah.
And listening about all of that, the quote from Martin Luther King came to mind. about the when injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
Melinda talked about the dark art here in the U.S. and
Yeah.
how because of a legislation like that, a lot of people just don't get to know what they eat. And
Yeah.
Spurgeon, in the completely corner, like different corner of the world, is saying farmers in India, because they did not have access to information, a lot of them have died. A lot of them have invested a lot of money, and also, had to commit suicide because they got trapped in the cycle of debt. And my
Yes.
is, the what can we do? I think that's exactly why these tables were created. When we're able to talk to each other and realize that what's happening in this country, in the U.S., I mean, the same system prevails out of here and is creating the same issues. And just being around the table and talking about this as we're doing right now, I think it's already a good step, just to make
Yeah.
sure that, knowing the truth, as they say, will free you, but will also piss you off. I think it's just good to realize that we're talking about the same system, both in this country and out of the country, and out of this country as well. And just sharing these two sides of the same truth around the table, I think for us, it's a good reminder that the struggles that are happening here are the same that our partners also are dealing with around the world. I just wanted to say that, and again, say that's the whole idea about this table. Just get together and think about what we can do here and what impact that can have out of this country when we're taking action here in the U.S.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Because one of the issues in India is that, the new rules of this government say that if you talk about protest or demonstration or any sort of roadshow or rally or some kind of group getting together, and if they talk or if they have any sort of not violence, but any sort of rebellious activity, that is going to be treated as anti-national and whatever names they would call under the sun, to keep them silent, and they would be arrested, and the organizations behind whoever is organizing those kind of protests would also risk losing what we call the permission to receive any sort of any support or any financial support, especially from from any country. That's what exactly happened with Greenpeace recently. They were in big trouble by the government. So it is quite challenging, but we are trying to work from the grassroots levels, and also trying to mobilize ways like peace ways of protesting and non-violent means, and going to the district authorities and submitting kind of memorandums, and that those are the strategies that we are following at the moment. But yeah, anything beyond that would actually would actually have a greater impact for the movement itself. So yeah.
Thank you, Spurgeon. So we are at 3 o'clock, but before we close, I want to give each of you just one more opportunity to give us, if you have one takeaway, like if there's one thing that you want each of us to take away from this conversation. Valerie kind of stole my thunder in his comment about us recognizing that all of this work is connected internationally and domestically for us here in the U.S. But if you have any additional comments, like one thing that you want us to all take from this discussion to leave here with, please share it at this time.
Well, I think the key information, the key thing that we need is exchange of information, and we need to know what the developments are in the US, and you need to know what the developments are in India. So that, I think, that's the great way of clearing the, what do you call, the vacuum between both these great nations, and the exchange of information is paramount in our work. That's what I feel is the most important thing.
Definitely, I agree, Spurgeon. Thank you for that. And I guess to build on that, you know, the biggest thing that I would suggest is our power is in the grassroots. Time and time again, we see government officials, we see those with power and influence sell us out. And Spurgeon mentioned this too. We have grassroots power, we have people power. And to build on what he said, you know, that sharing of information and connecting the struggles across the oceans helps us understand that power and enables us to use it more effectively.
Wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. So with that, I think we're going to close. I want to thank both of our presenters for this great information and for helping us begin what I think will be a really wonderful dialogue going forward. I want to let you know that our next webinar will be on Wednesday, October 19th, again at 2 p.m. And I think for that webinar, I think we should have a conversation about exactly what we talked about here, the fact that our power is in the grassroots. So let's talk about some local strategies for addressing this. So we're going to have a down and dirty conversation for our next webinar. Okay? So